So delighted to have you back for week 2 of this 4-part series on the Enneagram as mirror to the soul. And again, if you didn't get the handouts, there's a website. We'll make sure you get that information where all these handouts over the various weeks and the PowerPoints and so forth, they're all there. So you can download them and access them and refer to them. So I think most everybody was here last week, but a few new faces. So we welcome you. And if you want to catch up with what you missed last week, the recordings are available as well. So here we go. I'm going to pick up on the theme from last week and just go a little more deeply into it. This is maybe a starting point. So I know my number, I know my type. Now what do I do? And I think for a lot of people, that's about as far as the Enneagram goes. It can be a curiosity tool. We can make it coffee conversation. But of course, you know, and many of you know because you're here taking a more in-depth class, that's just the start, really the very, very, very surface of it in the tradition, that it often took many years to not only understand what that number and type means and where that came from, but more importantly, what the path of transformation is once we know that. So this work that we're doing here on the soul child especially, really for the most part presumes that you know your style pretty solidly. I'm going to move back and forth in the language between Enneatype and Enneastyle. There's different schools there. So in other words, if you didn't know what your really home base Enneastyle was, then the soul child work becomes a bit confusing because it's in reference to, it illuminates where the wound is in your home base. So if maybe you're really hung up on this, it could be, and we can talk about that during the question and answer time, an indication that you might want to be looking at a different style. So just stay open to that. I find over the years that many people come to these classes. Sometimes people have been told by others, this is your type, which is a horrible thing to do. That offends the ancient tradition completely. No one can ever tell you. I can't tell you. It's really a journey of self-discovery that's done in the narrative tradition this way, by sharing with each other. So maybe if someone has put you into a box, don't just stay there. Allow this also to be a time to maybe explore that a little more deeply. So this evening, there's 3 things I'd like to share with you. First of all, to talk a little bit more about this notion of Enneagram as soul work. And then we'll talk more about the soul child and then transformational practices. So last week, if you remember, I said, to know thyself, that's what the ancient Greeks said. That's quoted in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and New Testament. It's seen as a sort of a pivotal starting point for spiritual growth and formation. And if we don't know ourselves, we're going to be all over the place, probably trying to know the other out there, and that knowledge is going to get skewed. In Enneagram wisdom, and remember, this has a deep, deep taproot in the Pythagorean school of philosophy and physics and spirituality. In fact, we think that maybe the understanding of the relationship between the different numbers came from the Pythagoreans. And the Greeks, and you see this expression used in Eastern Orthodox Eastern Christian tradition, Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. It was the name that the Eastern Christians give to the Holy Spirit. And the Enneagram early teachers in the Greek tradition called this holy wisdom. They said you need Holy Spirit, if you will, which is the feminine principle, and the soul, the anima, is feminine, whatever, regardless of what our gender is. That we need that to be able to know this. It's not enough to know it with the mind itself. The mind can just get us so far. So that's why the soul work of the Enneagram is so important. And So I asked you last time at the end of our time together to look at a couple of questions. And I wonder if maybe some of you had a chance to do that. To look at a question from Rumi: how could you let yourself be silently pulled by the stronger pull of what you really love? And Ignatius's twist on that is, how could you create a space where you could discover the deeper yearnings of your heart? Both of those are good Enneagram questions. And both Rumi and Ignatius had a connection to the Enneagram. So whether you work with that or not, let's kind of hold those questions out there this evening, because really that's a good starting point. Instead of trying to figure this out in my head, where I can get really confused, if the starting point for the soul work of the Enneagram is to pay attention to what it is that I truly love, and to see where I can create space in my life to know that deepest yearning and desire, that's going to give me a direct key and cue deeper Enneagram work. So last time I talked about the fact that the Enneagram was not called the Enneagram until the 19th century. Its earliest name seems to be the 9 Faces of God, which says something essential about its core soul work orientation. It's a tool not just to know the outer personality, but to know what's underneath the personality. And the 9 Faces of God, that notion, of course, is based on a belief that ultimately we're just a refraction, 1/9 of the truth, that we're all about getting to know the one, and that we're all part of the one. So for those of you who are just popping on now, please make sure that you mute your audios and your videos, please. So a word about this. Last week I mentioned the Enneagram and Kabbalah as one of the great sources that I'm going to be drawing from here in the next weeks. Rabbi Howard Addison's book is brilliant. And of course, Kabbalistic teaching is the mystical branch of Judaism that arises in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, in the last millennium. And the overlay between how the Jewish mystics understood self and relationship to God, and how close this is to Enneagram theory, I find absolutely fascinating. So a couple of minutes about Kabbalah. And I don't want to cheapen it, but I want to say that the essence of it, if you can imagine this beautiful labyrinth, which are all these different pathways that we take, our 9 different pathways, if you will, to the Ein Sof. That's the term. It's understood as God, the divine, prior to any self-manifestation. In other words, this is, if you can imagine, the divine creative energy before anything was created. And so Ein Sof could be translated as the unbeginning, the no end or infinity. And because in this tradition, God and the world are eternally being co-created, our radical interrelationship goes through many stages of unity, individuation, dissolution, radical reunion, and non-separateness. So the way in which the rabbis held this up, they said, all you have to do is go to Genesis and look at the very opening words of Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim ve'et haaretz. The first words of Genesis, the first words of the Bible are literally, in the beginning was created God. Now, just stop and think about the implication of that. That's not usually how we read it in our King James Version or whatever. In the beginning, God created, right? No, they insist that the Hebrew is much more subtle than that. And the subtlety of it is that God is not a noun, but a verb. And they say we know this because the only place in the Bible where God even begins to give God's name to us is in Exodus, when we get the unspeakable name of the divine. It means I am that I am becoming that I am. And if that's true, they say, then I, as a spark of that original divine creative energy, I am Richarding as God is Godding. I am constantly becoming. It's not like some finished product. My soul is not something sort of dropped into me. And I just find that theological perspective brilliant in terms of understanding what we're going to talk to you about today in terms of Enneagram soul child, because this is not a flat two-dimensional tool. It's almost like looking at a hologram. And I think we often start with the Enneagram by looking at our individual types, and we stay stuck there. But this spiritual soul work invites us into this ongoing, creative, dissolving, until finally I get to this place where what we all are sort of individuated unities, all separate, but all one. So psychologically, we could sum that up with Erich Fromm here, that the experience of separateness arouses anxiety. In fact, it is indeed the source of all anxiety. And that's really going to be a big issue in the West, because our individualism is our religion almost. So to talk about Enneagram in the radical way that I want to talk about it today, in a way we have to move out of our dualistic Western categories and go back to these great mystical traditions out of which we see God. Just, if you've never thought of that before, maybe some of you have, begin to imagine what in your prayer life, your devotional life, God as verb rather than God as noun. And you begin to see the dynamic implications of that. That's really maybe what's in the origin of our tradition. So my friend Richard Rohr says he says about unitive consciousness. He says, now more than ever, we see our collective shadow on full display. I was talking to him this week, and he said, oh my gosh, we're just like in the full mud of our limitation right now, exposing our fear, our bigotry, and our dualistic oppositional energies. It's there in religion and politics, that cannot bring the change we so desperately want and need. Only the contemplative mind can hold light and dark, good and evil together. Only unitive consciousness allows transformation at the deepest levels. I think that's the foundation of Enneagram work. It's not to get rid of our vices and to get rid of our shadow. It is, as I said last week, in fact, an invitation to bring the shadow, the part of me that's not yet finished, that's still being created, into consciousness, because that shadow wants to and needs to be heard. And when it's received instead of denied, it becomes the source of rich emotional healing and vitality. So I think our depth psychology schools of the 20th century exactly follow the same. I think this is good psychology and good spirituality. It's sacred psychology. So Rumi would sum this all up by saying this: why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Here, we allow ourselves to be self-defined, and we fall into self-loathing, because sometimes when we do Enneagram work, we beat ourselves up more, which is the opposite of what this tool should do. It opens the door of our prison. It frees us. It frees us. So that's my little sermon tonight on Enneagram as soul work and why I'm so committed to it. It's not just, you can get the personality typology stuff everywhere. There's tons of books on that now. But this part that I'm going to talk to you about now, this is, I think, where the real origin of the Enneagram came from and why I'm glad you're here and interested. So deeper tonight into this soul child concept as our map for awakening. We will not awaken, we will not transform just knowing our type. No matter how much we study it and know about its source and origin, it will just stay stuck in my threeness or sixness or nineness. So the map for awakening, for real transformation, is in the soul child concept, which is why I, again, last week wanted to hold up the work of Sandra Maitri, who I'm really drawing from here, and Richard Rohr, and the Alma school, the Enneagram of Holy Ideas. So we're going to begin to go deeper into exploring that here this evening. So let me see if I can explain it again. And I would not be surprised. In fact, I would expect that if this is your first time being exposed to this soul child concept, that it's a bit confusing, but I say daunting. And so rather than just saying, oh, I give up, this is too much for me, please, I'm going to beg you to hang on, because this is really worth hanging on. This is the way in which we find our way home. And that would be the Almas school definition of what it means to embrace our soul child. And I think I showed you this beautiful image from our artist friend in Corpus Christi, Texas, the embrace of darkness and light. And this is a beautiful thing. It's down at Rohr's Center. It's a huge, huge piece. And the leaves on it are from the loquat tree, which according to tradition was the tree of good and evil in the garden. So it's going back to the garden. It's finding our way back home, where I don't fight against myself, my shadow self, but I totally embrace darkness and light, reach a place of complete embrace. The way that we do this in Enneagram language is to know and recognize, as Kabbalah says, as the Christian mystics say, that there is in each of us an essential self, the untouchable and untouched and unharmed self. That's the soul. That's what the Hindus say of the soul. Nothing can harm it. We talk about soul damage sometimes. I have to be careful when we use that language with Western categories. The personality can be damaged. And the soul can be hidden and pushed away, and we can lose sight of it. But the soul itself, the essential self, is there. And I know in my years in working in men's prisons, prison work, I had to believe there was an essential self there beneath the murderer and the rapist and the broken man was someone who was a spark of God. And I often found in prison ministry that once I could establish trust and I could look a prisoner in the eyes, he would often just melt into a puddle of tears, because very often he never had a father in his life who could accept him that way. And sometimes he didn't have a mother either. And sometimes the wound of that parent wound was so deep, it took him off in a negative direction. So the soul child says, we want to go back home. The theory of this is, in a way, that we were actually born more like the number or the type that we move towards in that line for growth. That's really who we were in some ways. And then what happens is that we lose sight of that. Circumstances, and it's nothing that we blame ourselves for. We aren't allowed to be that type. Discovering this, you could do this on a psychiatrist's couch. But I think the Enneagram also gives us a key into why I was not allowed as a 3 to accept the essence of my 6 qualities. And so I picked up and created a personality, a shell around myself, which is not my full, true, essential self. And when I can go against that arrow, it's not just a younger version of myself. It's the part of us that was not held, not fully allowed and supported as children. It's qualities which reside in this thing we call the heart point. We'll talk about that more this evening. Were somehow not acceptable in our childhood, in our environment. So to survive, hear that, to survive, we had to suppress that aspect and truth of ourself and put on the armor of this little self. I won't even say false self. It's not a bad self. And to lose contact with our essence. So soul child work is so important because it allows us, the beautiful thing about it is that as we grow, we actually become more like who we always were to begin with. If you can believe that. So instead of, we asked you, do I change your name? I'm a Richard, I'm an E3 with a wing 4. In a way, no, that's who you see. That's my personality. Really, in my soul child, I'm E6 with wing 5. Now that's a whole other universe for me to explore. And that's what I'm hoping that each of you will do during this month together. This heart point, which is the essence of the type that I left behind as a child. The heart point is the idealized, the best part, the high point of my soul child type. It's a problematic structure, Maytree says. The soul child was part of our consciousness and it was arrested when we were very young, often even before we're conscious. So when we begin to explore this, and that's why I'm asking you to hang on, even if you feel a little confused, it sometimes feels like the ego self, like it's a part of us that's still a child. I go back there and say, well, I don't want to be that. I've grown up. I've moved beyond that. And that's where it's tricky. That's where we need practices to help us here. Since the aspects of our heart point were not acceptable, and remember that's that essence of the type that I moved away from, we then, each of us, developed other ones. We moved in the direction of the arrow to our type because those characteristics were acceptable to our parents or to our environment or to our school or our church or our pastor or whatever as we matured. So we got good at it. And you do that. And that's not bad. There's gift in that. You don't want to get rid of the gift. But in the meantime, realize that what happens is this soul child remains behind, kind of like locked in some kind of a frozen psychic space, becoming hidden in our unconscious. We're so divorced and separated from it. We're shocked and surprised when we begin to learn about it for the first time and say, my gosh, where have I been? How is it that I have missed? And then of course, the soul begins cheering and saying, oh, finally, you're paying attention. There is so much you have to learn here. Okay. So remember, in terms of the arrows, with the inner flow of the Enneagram, we're not talking about the outer flow, we're talking about the inner flow. So the growth point is what we call against the arrow. So if you see your type, you're going to have to go against the arrow for growth, and you're going to go with the arrow in trance. So sometimes this gets confusing because, well, where's the arrow at? And so just think about it as you got 2 lines to every type. And one type is the fixation point. It's just kind of where we go when we're asleep. It's not a bad place. It's just a trance point. And the hard work of the salmon swimming upstream to reconnect to the soul child, the heart point, that's going to be the growth point. So this is what many of us were taught with Enneagram theory. And I want to just kind of disavow this, because this really goes against the ancient spiritual Enneagram teachers. This is how the Enneagram was presented to me. I'm saying, stop, no. I, as a 3, had a 6 connection and a 9 connection. I was taught that, well, when I am at my best, I take on the high points of 6. And when I'm at my worst or under greatest stress, I take on the low points of 9. That is very dualistic, and that totally disempowers the whole system, because the web of this is the interconnectivity of all aspects. So in place of that, what I'd like you to begin thinking about is each of us, and we can see where the two lines are that connect us. And you could use your passions and virtues as a way of understanding this. So for me, my personality as type 3, the passion of that, the shadow of that, we could say, is vanity. When I go to the heart point of 6, I see that the high essence of type 6 is courage. And there, in a way, begins to be the map that I need to go back upstream to discover what was it, why was it early on, what circumstances were there that made me more fearful and not courageous to be my true self, so that I, as a 3, would put on a shell or a show person so that you wouldn't see my authentic heart. Here's the other side of that. The soul child desire of type 3 is authenticity. That's what 3s really want. In fact, we're afraid that we are not authentic, that we're all surface and no essence. So when I swim upstream to the 6, one of the first things I encounter there, as great as this theory sounds, is, I see the shadow side of 6, which is fear. And the first part of my soul child that I kind of, in a way, want to run away from is, you know what? I know that fear place. That's deep in me, deep in my unconscious. And you know what? I ain't going there. I am not going to live a fearful existence. I am going to take on the world, and I'm going to make it in my image. And I'm going to work harder than any other human being on the planet to be able to fashion it in a way that I'll use all of my 3 gifts to do. So you begin to see where the dilemma is with the soul child. What begins to first show up when you identify with the soul child is the negative side of it that makes you feel like, no, I don't want to go there. And I'll show you how that plays out in terms of each of the types here. We start to see the immature qualities and the negative passions of our soul child instead of the heart point or the essence. And as long as I get stuck there or get frightened by that, then I'll probably just give up on this, and I'll just be happy to stay in I know I'm a 3 on the Enneagram with a 4 wing, and I guess that's good enough. No, it really will not. It is not the map for transformation. So remember, last week I put this up here. This was a list of all of the different types and the soul child. So just in case you still need to be reminded of that. So the 1 soul child is 7, the 2 is 4, and down the list. So when we work with this, just know at least that that's what you're working with. Now, again, of course, you can see where if your type is shaky, then the soul child thing is going to really be confusing, because it's not going to give you any kind of answer. So I would just say that could be a key to look maybe more at other aspects or other possible types. Sometimes it actually can be the flip side. Sometimes your soul child maybe is your type and vice versa. That's a possibility as well. So it's a game of mirrors at first, and it takes some discernment and maybe sometimes the help of another soul friend to help us figure that out. So we talk about the 3 centers of intelligence, the 3 groups of types and the so-called body, heart, and head types. I talked especially last week introducing this about the 2, 3, and 4, the so-called heart types, where the meta emotion is shame, what they share in common, the deepest emotion. So tonight I want to talk more about the 5, 6, and 7. So those of you who are 5, 6, and 7s, maybe especially cue into this, because I'd like you to participate during the question time. The so-called mental thinking types, where the meta emotion is fear. So let's parse this in terms of the 5, 6, and 7. Okay. So the soul child of 5 is 8. So we would say that's the place in the old theory, we would have said, where the 5 needs to go for integration. And that's still true. But this is more nuanced. It's not so much where I go to integrate. I can certainly see aspects of that are true, but it's more where I need to go to remember this energetic, involved, gut space type that had a lust. And remember, the passion is not all negative, for life, was able to imagine taking on almost anything. And that somehow, maybe in the unconscious, early child of the 5, that was just too much. That was unsafe. And so what the 5 did is created the shell of almost one of the most opposite energies of 8. Very, very introspective, introverted, we might even say, withdrawn. Very much not engaged. My 5 friends often say, the reason we have a body is it's a transportation device for the head. It's like everything is up here. Whereas the source of this, the soul child, is the body, which in fact, without which the head work makes no sense. So the swimming upstream for the 5 to the 8 begins to take the avarice, which is that sort of collecting of knowledge passion, getting to know it all myself so I can, because it's not a safe universe out there, so I'll trust it with my knowledge. And in some ways, connect that to the 8 and to recognize, wait a minute, I begin to see how foolish that is. And you'll see that when we look at the practices that we recommend for type 5, the spiritual practices that can take us back to type 8. That in fact, we need to move into a place and into practices, spiritual practices, that teach us that nature is ridiculously generous and in fact wasteful. Look at the seeds that there are wasted to create one oak tree, one person, whatever the case might be. And so the interrelationship between 5 and 8 becomes this interesting exploration, which is why I gave you the Sandra Maitre and the Richard Rohr definitions of where the 5 came from and why their soul child work is so important. It's going to help them connect with the divine idea, as they said in Kabbalah. Type 6. Okay, so what's the deal here? So this fearful personality was not fearful. Their soul child was believing that the world, in fact, was the most benign, safe place. The 9 energy at its highest point is the most trusting of types. It finds it difficult to judge. It more easily says and can see the truth in every point of view. And for some reason, that energy was not allowed to the 6. And so batten down the hatches, let that crazy 9 stuff go. Boy, that's going to get you into trouble. That's not my experience of the universe. And therefore, I put on the armor of fear. And I mistrust. And I really wonder about everybody, including myself. And so that swimming upstream to the essence of 9 is to recover what really is the divine spark inside of the 6th soul. And maybe for the first time to rejoice in the fact that I am not a being indelibly paralyzed by fear. That's just a play I've been acting out of. And there's a whole other playbook that I can now spend the rest of my life discovering. So, but see, when the 6 goes back there, what do they see first? They see the sloth of 9, which is the low point. That's what they first see. Oh boy, I know where that'll get you. If you're slothful, you are not aware, attuned, vigilant, hyper vigilant. So I don't want to go to that 9 stuff because that's going to make me fall asleep and then I'll be overwhelmed and annihilated. So what the 6 has to do is go back and work through that to begin to appreciate the high side, the essence, this heart point of type 9. And then the last of the 3 heart headspace types, 7. So we've got the opposite, we've got the 7-5 going on here. So this soul child of this extremely outgoing, energetic, almost ADHD energy in the world, very gluttonous for experiences in life, kind of not all that excited about the sobriety thing, wakes up to realize that that's not who they were. They were, in their essence, this little monk that wanted quiet and wanted depth and needed the space to be able to go deep, to not attach, so that they could become not jack of all trades and master of none. But the 7 says, wait a minute, if I go to that 5, no, I'm going to have to give up all of my many interests. And I don't want to do that. I think I'll be annihilated. And yet there's often in the 7, I find, when they wake up to this, a realization that they're exhausted from their 7-ness. And there's something in the 5 place that's a place to rest, just as the 9 is a place for the 6 to rest, and just as the 8 is a place for the 5 to rest. And as I begin to explore, and in my prayer and in my spiritual exercise, begin to reacquaint myself, not with the downside of my soul child, but with its essence, I begin to really find life in a brand new way. I don't stop being a 7. I still keep all of that gift, but it's put in a new container. So that's a little summary of what we talked about last week. And what I'd like you to do, because I'd like to have more time for us to have some dialogue, is for you to take a little bit of time now. We'll take about 15 minutes. I'll put on some music if you like. And to journal on 2 things. Instead of, again, trying to figure out the soul child thing, that's too much for you. Start with this open-ended question. Identify some significant area of struggle, fear, or anxiety in your life right now, that which we often call the tragic gap. The way life is, the way I'd like it to be, there's a gap between it. So see if you can identify, and I'm not just talking about a little gap du jour, today she crossed my path and upset me. That's just a suffering of the day. See if you can see what is a really deeper tragic gap that maybe you've been carrying with you for some time in your life. Maybe it's the tragic gap of your life. And then after naming it, do it in that order, then go back to the Rohr and Maitrey descriptions of your soul child and see what might be being revealed to you about your tragic gap. So approach it that way, indirectly. You don't come at the soul direct on. You come at the soul at a slant. Okay, and so that's what we're going to do here for the next 15 minutes. Okay, we can start coming back, please. And I'd like to take a little bit of time. This is where the oral tradition works, because you can't figure this out in your own head. And it's hard not being in the same room together where we can see each other's energies, but we can have a little sharing of that aspect here, even virtually in a Zoom meeting. So I would just say to those of you who do jump in and are courageous to share anything, including, I don't know what in the hell this all means, you could be doing a great favor to other people who are searching as well. So I'll do what I did last week. I'll start with seeing if we have any type 5s here. If somebody would like to jump on, if you are identified as a 5, unmute your video if you would be willing to, and your audio, and we'll have a little conversation.
Hey, Richard, it's
Chris showed up. Always brave for 5s to show up, and we're grateful that yeah, you're here. Is this an aspect of the Enneagram you've studied before, Chris?
yes. In my maybe 20 years of studying the Enneagram, I've encountered it to some extent, and I was just remembering Patty, who I first studied the Enneagram with. We talked about Kentucky and the monastery there where Merton was. And so Patty lived around there, and she was a tiny person like dynamite. And she worked with preemie babies at the hospital, kids who had been born 6 months, 7 months, before their 9-month term. And so I'm just remembering Patty, who was an 8, and thinking about my soul child as an 8 who's fearless. And so I have encountered this concept, and it has been set aside for a bit. And I've been working on it this year through Jungian psychology and through my shadow, which coincides and parallels some of the soul work.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. So during that reflection time, when you look, and you don't have to reveal anything specific, but when you considered maybe some aspect of life where life wasn't working, or where there was a tragic gap of some sort, if we could use that term, having that as your starting point, and then rereading or looking at the soul child of 8, does that give any insight or illumination to the issue?
Yes, it has. And I did find up Richard Rohr's soul child advice for a 5. And, that was not waiting, not studying, trying to get all the information in so I would be prepared, which I learned to do with my PhD father, who's the number 3, and was afraid to be powerful as a child. But Rohr says, identify with the absolute power of God and the divine genius of God that an 8 would take on the world, take on life with, in the now, in the present, and find support, that you can't necessarily see, but can know is there.
Yeah, good.
So let's fight.
Right. There's quite a dialectic going on there. I wonder if you, either in the past when you've explored this or now, one of the things that Maitre kind of warns us about, and Almas does too, is that sometimes the aspect of the soul child that we see, because it's sort of frozen in time back there, is a little frightening, or is off-putting, or I wonder if you relate to that at all.
Sure. Maitre helped me with talking about lustfully getting immersed in life, and you could become a bully or a bigot as you go to 8, and that's there's plenty of those people out there, and I have a distaste for that, and I don't really want to go there. And yes, I am comfortable in my castle as a 5, and I do love books and reading and good food and fires, and it's pretty comfortable here. Thank you.
No, thank you. Well, And I think that's where this is like a puzzle we're putting together. The piece next week we're really going to focus on, but it's starting to show up here already, is this notion of the holy idea, the transformational idea. So we'll see. I don't want to cloud us with more terms here, but Rohr says that very nicely and clearly in his little description there when he talks about absolute power, which we can see in the 8 ego-driven personality can be very destructive or frightening and move the 5 inside to a place of mistrust. But the holy idea of the absolute power being the dimension of God, the dimension of the divine, that doesn't have that sort of warped ego attachment to it, is a safe place, can be a safe place for the 5 to explore and access that 8 energy without being fearful that you're going to be dragged into becoming the opposite of what your personality has formed.
Very good.
All right, thank you. That's very good. So what I'm going to do here is just stop for a second and share the screen and look at the recommendations for spiritual practice of 5. There might be time for other 5s to speak up as well. By the way, just in terms of where I'm getting these practices from, there are 3 sources. There's a 4th century, a 13th century, and a 16th century manual from, these all come from the Christian tradition, that talk about the practices that best could be a map for the spiritual seeker to move out of their personality and towards that holy idea or that soul child self. So there's some general things there. I gave you some slides about general practices that tend to work with headspace in general. But for here, when we talk about the soul child of 5, we're talking about any practice, as Evagrius would call it in the 4th century, where wisdom, which is the core essence of the 5, that gift of wisdom, of deep, deep knowing, directs action. So it's the opposite. 8 can just sort of move, without thinking. And there's times when there's a gut space movement that's appropriate. But the gift, when you put the high energy of 8 and 5 together, is that you get the gift of 5, which is wisdom, and then it doesn't just stay marinating in its inner self, but it's actually able to be the source of action. So St. Evagrius in his practice says, this is great. Look for the guidance of nature. Any type could do that, but he says the question here is, how does remembering my connection to nature embody wisdom that no longer hides from others? There's a 4th century courageous question. And what Evagrius would do, one of the Syrian desert fathers, is he would say to a 5, I want you to take that question out. I want you to really be with that, because at first it's almost maybe can have an inherent contradiction in it. And I'd like you to explore it and live into it, and not see the body as a transportation device for the head, but see in your reconnection to nature a kind of wisdom that transcends the wisdom you're ever going to find in your head. And that's the kind of wisdom that can direct action and really connect to others, instead of keeping it sort of in avaricious selfishness. So that would be the recommended practice for the 5 from an ancient bit of wisdom that you might, those of you as 5s, and anything that would connect you, body as nature. I have a friend who's a retired surgeon, and he said, I just had to finally take a Pilates class, and that's not what I wanted to do. And my daughter was taking a class in tribal fusion dancing. And I thought, oh my God, it's the last place in the world where a 5 would ever want to show up. And he said, I begin to find a kind of liberation when I connect in my spiritual practice with my body and move it out of my head. So maybe there's some kind of wisdom and advice there, not only for you, Chris, but for other 5s as well. And then one of our contemporary wisdom 5 teachers, the great philosopher Simone Weil, when you let people care for you and cry for you, it can straighten out your soul. So allowing that physical connection, not to be separate in the castle, but to have that sort of intimacy. This is someone who's really speaking from her own experience, because she was the most reclusive 5 maybe that you can imagine. In fact, she died of bulimia. But she began to discover in her philosophy and her spiritual practices that the more she could allow others in and to weep together, I love that phrase, it can straighten out your soul. Maybe a bit of advice for 5s as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you, Chris, for volunteering. That's helpful. I wonder if we have a 6 out there today who would be willing to step up to the plate. Anybody there have a 6 after your name? Or if it's not after your name, you know, you're Karen, is it?
Well, I'm a confused 4 or a 6. I don't know,
Okay.
but when I started just writing, and then I forgot to go back to look at this soul type for the 6, and I thought, oh my God, this is what I'm writing. And so I'm thinking like, oh, maybe I am a 6. I've been thinking I'm a 4 for a long time. So I think that you mentioned that last week, that possibly if you identify then with, you know, the dark side of something, or you can see the shadow side within, you know, your soul child, that maybe that's closer to who you are. Is that right?
Yes, it can. It can be another way of learning. It can. And interesting, because the soul child of 6 is 9, and the soul child of 4 is 1. So they're right next to each other. So, which could explain why it's kind of hard for you to break the tie there, because in the soul child realm, they're right next to each other and they have wings of each other. So
that is
this
interesting.
So instead of having to worry about whether I'm 6 or 4, we can go back there and we can explore. In this case, since we're dealing tonight with 6ness, let's take a look at that and look at that relationship. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here with 6 that I did with Chris in type 5. So I'm going to put this up here. So here we have this interesting 6-9 connection, where the high point, the one of the essential holy ideas to the 6 soul is faithfulness at its best. There's a loyalty here. Now 4s can relate to that too, but it really takes on another level of depth with 6ness. There's almost a sort of an obligation to be faithful and loyal. And you don't find that quite the same in 4ness. In 4, there's more of a sense of freedom and a willingness to explore whatever it is that I'm authentic, and then I'll be faithful to that. But in 6, there tends to be a sort of a locked-in groundedness to relationships or to whatever it is. And that notion, that need to be faithful, is because for the 6, if I'm not, I lose security. It's not a safe world. The only thing I can sort of bank on, because you can't trust anything really, ultimately. So the only thing I can really bank on is if I'm trying to draw between the lines and really stay faithful to whatever it is I'm going to choose on my list of fidelities. And that's a gift. So we don't want to get rid of the gift in 6. But what it does when it goes to 9, to a soul child, is instead of it being driven out of this sort of fearful, anxious place, there's a restingness in the fidelity of the 6, because the 9 is a soul child and it is the place of harmony. And what the 6 wakes up to is, oh my God, that's what I wanted. Deep, deep down, I wanted peace and harmony. I wanted to believe it was a safe universe. I wanted to believe you could trust and everything was going to be okay. In the end, all shall be well. But I wasn't allowed that. So I had to put on my armor and defend myself and put on this 6 persona. Does that resonate at all, Karen? You're muted there, so you can.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of bringing tears to my eyes. Yeah, it does resonate. Yeah.
So Rohr writes about it. The 6 has chosen a defensive posture against their primal knowing. So deep, deep down, they knew it was safe, but they weren't allowed to trust that. And so instead of resting in the full presence of and being held by God, by the divine, by the universe, they had to force the issue. I will assure it. I will prove it. I will maintain it, they say. And once they held an image of this, it became a world of exhaustive energy. There's no rest in that 6 personality. It is just, and at some place, especially in the second half of life, I just run out of the energy to maintain that anymore. I just can't. I just break down in some kind of way. So what's so great about this is that when they can go back to that 9 place, and they are the most defended against, that all begins to crack and melt down, and they say, oh, wait a minute, it is okay. I don't have to make it okay. There's nothing I can think that will make it be okay. It is okay in the gut, in the body. Now that's peace that I don't have to try to force and manufacture, do you see? That's the story.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Richard. Yeah.
But yeah, even when you just gave your little description there, and again, it's not about telling people what they are, but I always say when you hang around decades with the Enneagram, I always listen when people talk to the verbs that they use. And if I was just to replay our little conversation here, the verbs that you used were 6 verbs. They really were. They were headspace verbs, which is very, very different. So let's take a look at that. If again, I'm not saying that's it absolutely. The exploration continues, but let's look at some advice. In this case, from a 13th century manual. Raymond of Lowell was a mystic, a monk on Mallorca in Spain, and his image of the Enneagram is a ladder of enlightenment. So he's got a ladder up against a wall with 9 steps on it. And he says, that's what we do in our personality. We climb the ladder, and then we get to the top of the wall and he says, oh my God, the ladder's been leaned up against the wrong wall. So I have to climb down and put the ladder up against the new wall, which is my soul child. Okay. So that's his metaphor or imagery. And he says, in terms of advice, that what the 6 is yearning for is this all-embracing trust. Instead of always taking, seeing the fearful things, the question is, how does deep trust replace dread and generate vibrant, open-hearted relationship? And the practice that he recommends is this, very simple. Just look, don't think. because the 6 is always thinking. And then, okay, I won't think, and I'm thinking. By the way, the philosopher Wittgenstein used that as the core of his philosophy. It's brilliant. And all of us in the West, in some ways, have been bit by the 6 bug. And so we could benefit with this advice in our contemplative practice. Just look, observe, see what's there, what's working, what's in harmony, and stop falling back into the head of worrying about it, making it happen, worrying what could go wrong, what will go wrong. And in that place, I can really rest. So here's a beautiful piece of advice. We're coming up to African American History Week. This is Howard Thurman, one of my favorite authors. He says, don't ask yourself what the world needs. See, the 6 feels obligated. I have to be faithful to what I'm supposed to do, right? Ask yourself instead what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Just break the mold, color outside the lines, throw caution to the wind. That's when the 6 knows they're moving back to that 9 soul place, and they can have a burst of creative possibility that they wouldn't have thought imaginable in the earlier stages of life. So Howard Thurman's book, With Heart and Head, is a great one, putting head and heart together. Just wanted to mention that for all of us, and for all of us. So I hope that helps a little bit, Karen. Maybe that resonates, seems a bit, maybe. Yeah,
Thank you.
good. And maybe some of the rest of you who are 6s could take a little bit of that in as well. So let's see if we have any 7s here. I hope so. Any 7 like to volunteer, to show up? I see some 7s there. I won't call on you. See if you can. 7s usually don't mind jumping in to the fray here. Nobody dies doing this.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
I'm
there
a
we go.
7.
Good. Who's
My
this?
Hello, my name's Mary Preem. I'm a 7, and
Why don't you unmute your video there, Mary, so we can see then your picture will focus.
well, I think I want to claim the 5 tendency to stay hidden
Okay.
because I've sort of been working for years with relaxing into 5, and the wonderful thing about it for a 7 is I don't have to be on stage anymore. And I don't have to be out there and being bright and cheerful. And I went to a workshop a few years ago on Enneagrams as we go into old age. I realized that I'm kind of lucky because old age kind of pushes us into being 5s. And that's what I need to be doing anyway. And I really welcomed the isolation that the COVID confinement did, the way introverts kind of love having a chance to just stay home and go within. So I've sort of been doing that, which I think is why I didn't feel the resistance and the sense of shadow about 5, because I've been doing that for a while. My social instincts have kind of pushed me into being the altruistic variant of a 7, just having a lot of energy and joy about trying to make the world better. And I've noticed recently that somebody wanted me to do a project for our social justice committee. And I just said, nope, I'm retired. And I really needed to do that. And it felt good.
Good. That sounds very healthy, Mary. So, yeah, I'll respect that. And let me just put up here what happens here is that joy, which is the essence, it's the holy idea of 7. You don't want to lose that. But instead of just being that outgoing, performing 7 or looking for experience 7, because we often mischaracterize and misstereotype sevens as all being sort of extroverted, and they're not. Sevens can be deeply introverted. But that seven gift, that holy idea of true joy, deeply heals. And I think one of the painful realizations of seven sometimes is that much of life can be lived on the surface. And it's only in going inside and in my cultivating that contemplative five soul child that depth is found, which sometimes is scary. It's a little scary because, you know, it's easier to stay on the surface and I have many possibilities going and I can be juggling things, but you're already talking about exactly what can happen in the last chapters of life. We can begin to see the advantage of that. So that's the direction here. Ignatius gives us some advice from the Iberian tradition of the Enneagram. So the invitation is co-creation. Okay, this is what happens when you put 7 and 5 together. So the sacred question becomes, how can less create an opening for more healed relationships? Because that inclination of 7 to want more, even in terms of spiritual experiences, to want more, by limiting myself and going deeper instead of wider on the surface, then this possibility of depth of relationships really opens up, which is part of the gift of the last chapters of a seven's life, is they can begin to maybe encounter that kind of depth that they've wanted all along, but maybe they haven't had the energy and time for. So I have a 7 who put together a journal, and this is what her journal is: the no and yeses journal. And can I pay attention? This would be a spiritual practice to when I want to say yes. And you just gave a great example of it. In the past, I would have said yes, but saying no actually is a beneficial spiritual practice. So that's beautiful. It sounds like you were already moving in that direction. And here's a little bit of wisdom from a contemporary 7, Desmond Tutu, who just passed away recently. And I just love the pictures of him where he's just so alive. He said, there are moments when it is clear, if I have eyes to see, that the life I am living is not the same as the life that wants to live in me. Oh, boy, that's coming right out of a 7. I'm seeing the difference between living life out there and this inner life that begins in my 5 soul child discovery to bubble up and become a new kind of North Star for directions in my life. So good job, Mary. Thank you. And thanks for volunteering for that. Excuse me. So I wanted to leave you with something so that you could, over the course of the next week before we get together next, maybe take this all a little deeper. And so in this case, I'm going to propose a poem. Maybe some of you know it. It's one of Rumi's famous poems called The Guest House. And I'm going to read it here as our closing blessing or invitation. And then I've left you with some questions that you can reflect on. And so let's read it first and then see where maybe this takes us into understanding soul child a little more deeply. The guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. That would be a great spiritual practice for a week, wouldn't it be? To set that intention at the beginning of the day. And at the end of the day, when we reflect on the day, maybe to journal and to imagine what guests showed up that day. And then not only to begin noticing that and work with that in metaphor, but begin to notice what's hard to welcome in your life. You know, what are you in resistance to? What am I in resistance to? And how might this teaching of the soul child inform our understanding and spiritual practice of this poem? So it's just one idea. I always like working with soul child, not so much directly trying to figure it out, but at a slant. And a poem is often a good way to approach the soul. You know, the soul, and this is great wisdom from the Sufi tradition, doesn't speak in words, in languages. It speaks in images, metaphors, songs, senses, poetry. So I hope that that's useful to you. And someone's saying here, my pages do not include this poem or the questions for reflection. Okay, well, we'll send it out again so that you have it. I'd like you all to, and we'll put it on that website. We will meet next week, same time, same place. I wanted to say just one thing that I didn't mention last week. Last Saturday, we had a half-day retreat at through Trinity Cathedral. We had, gosh, I don't know, 70 or 80 people. It was an amazing group of people on an introduction to Celtic spirituality, one of the real passions that we have at Sacred Art of Living Center in our Anamcara Project. And I told those folks, and I'm telling you, that we would never take this list of email addresses and presume to use them at our center. I'm doing this in service to Trinity Cathedral, but I did ask permission to be able to say and share with you, if you would like, more information about our programs, and especially about our Enneagram programs and our Depend Celtic Anamcara Project. So if you are interested in being on our mailing list, all you have to do is send an email to info, I-N-F-O, at sacredartofliving.org. And it's art, A-R-T, not heart, but art, A-R-T. So info at sacredartofliving.org, and we'll be happy to include you in our monthly newsletter and also send you some information on programs that are up and coming. I think I mentioned last week that I was involved many years ago with Marianne Board, doing a lot of coursework for Trinity Cathedral. And it's just been a delight at this stage of my life, at this last chapter of my life, to reconnect with your great group. Trinity brings many wonderful things together. And so this is delightful. So if you'd like to stay connected, that's how you do it. And have a blessed week.